Hi, everyone. I'm Heidi Rojek, co-owner of Capital Books in downtown Sacramento. I'm super happy to be bringing you all Lisa McMann. She's a new transplant to Sacramento from Arizona, and we are so excited to have her as our own now. We happened to meet Lisa shortly after we moved into an open Capital Books, and she and Matt came strolling in one spring afternoon and introduced themselves as our newest author team in Sacramento, and wanted to know if we would be interested in having her at the bookstore regularly as she launches new books. And we said, well, duh. So we were really excited about it, and we get to see her and Matt often in the bookstore, especially when her new books come out, and she comes in and does signings for a bit. And we're a little bummed that we can't be doing this in person like we have the last couple of times, but with challenges also comes opportunities, and something that doing these virtual author events has shown us is that authors can actually reach an even larger audience with doing these virtual events. So people who weren't necessarily living in the Sacramento area can now attend author events virtually from around the world. So even though COVID will hopefully someday be over, we are going to keep bringing you guys virtual events of when the authors are in the bookstore. We will just stream them live and have the recordings also available on our website. So Lisa is the author of many books, most recently the Unwanteds series, and now she's working on the Unwanted Quest series. So we're really excited to bring you Dragon Slayers, which I happen to have behind me here. So this is the latest. It might appear backwards on your screen, but this came out just yesterday, and we happen to have a bunch of signed copies in the bookstore right now. So even if you're not from Sacramento and you order a copy of Lisa's Dragon Slayers, you will receive a signed copy. So I've put the purchase link down at the bottom of your screen. So if you want to get a copy, we would appreciate it if you would support Capital Books. And if you don't want to support us, please support your local bookstore. It's important that readers support your local bookstores. With that out of the way, I'm going to just introduce Lisa McMann. She's got a great presentation prepared for you, and then we're going to toss it over to her husband Matt, who's going to go through the questions that you guys have been adding to the question box here. So as you think of questions, just click on the ask a question down there, type it in there, and then Matt will show that to Lisa. So hi there, Lisa.
Hey Heidi, this is awesome. I did want to add that if you use the Purchase Dragon Slayers button right there and order your book through Capital Books, they have some signed copies of the Florence poster, which I think you saw. You've all seen before, and you can see right behind Heidi's head there. But anyway, hi. I'm so happy to see all of you, and I'm seeing you in the comments as you're talking about where you're living right now, and I'm seeing like all these different states. I see you, Canada and Alaska, and so it's great to see all of you. And I'm really so excited about this book. Dragon Slayers was probably the most fun I've had writing a story in this series. Book 13 in the Unwanted's world has been just an absolute blast. And it was really scary to write, actually, because of what one of our main characters has to do. But I'm not going to give away very many spoilers. I don't want to spoil anything for you. But before I talk about that book, I thought I would just maybe give you a little insight in case you've never been to one of my events before. You might not even know how I got the idea for the books. Now, book one of the Unwanted series, the very first book, the OG, begins in the land of Quill. And Quill is a dystopian world where it's against the law to do anything creative. And if you are a kid and you get caught doing something creative, at the age of 13, you'll be considered unwanted and sent to your death, right? So the first chapter begins with Alex and Aaron Stowe standing there. They're identical twin brothers. They're standing in the commons of Quill, and they're waiting to find out who's going to be considered wanted and who's unwanted. And we find out that Aaron is one of the wanteds, and he's going to go on to the university, and he's kind of got his eye on the job of the high priest Justine. He wants to take that over someday. But then we also discover that Alex is considered unwanted because he's been caught so many times drawing in the dirt with a stick. And so he's declared unwanted, which feels just absolutely terrible, even though he was expecting it. And, Alex just stands there, and the governors come and they shackle his wrists and they chain him to the other unwanteds, and they all board a bus, and the bus takes them to the outskirts of Quill. And it comes to a stop outside of the death farm. And they get off the bus, and the gate to the death farm creaks open, and they shuffle in, and they're met by these enormous hulking eliminators with their red beady eyes and their black cloaks. And they know this is the end. I mean, the whole place is gray and desolate. They can see that great lake of boiling oil in the distance, and they think maybe that's where they're going to be thrown into. But then the gate closes, and something happens, right? The world begins to change. Colors start swirling around. A lawn springs up with fountains and the jungle in the distance. That great lake of boiling oil turns into a beautiful green sea, and the gray shack on the property becomes a gorgeous mansion. And after a minute, somebody comes out. It's a man with a colorful robe, and he's got this white hair that's kind of waving in the breeze. And he introduces himself as Mr. Today, and he says, "Welcome, children. How does it feel to be eliminated?" And he goes on to tell them that he's the guy who's supposed to be putting them to death, but he hasn't actually been doing that. In fact, he has created a secret magical world, and he's been hiding unwanteds in this magical world for years, and he's been teaching them to use their magic ability, their creative ability to do magic for fun, but also, to protect themselves in case they ever get discovered and have to fight. So that's a little bit about how that opening chapter began. And I get this question a lot. A lot of times kids might be a little bit nervous to ask me, but they'll say, "Lisa, why would you write a book about sending children to their deaths? Like, what's wrong with you, lady?" And I just tell them the truth. I say it's because of my own children, and not because I wanted to send them to their deaths, but something happened when they were 12 and 9. And when they were 12 and 9, they came home from school one day, and they had a letter in their backpacks. And the letter said, "Dear parents, we are so sorry to tell you that we have to eliminate the arts classes from school because of budget cuts. So we can't have art or music or theater." And I remember reading this letter and thinking, this is terrible. My son loves to draw. My daughter loves to act and sing. And I remember saying to them, "Wow, kids, I'm so sorry. It kind of feels like you're being punished for being creative." And then, as it happens, with writers, we ask, what if, a lot. And I remember thinking, what if there really was a world where children were punished for being creative? And I said this idea out loud, and my 12-year-old son said, not just punished, sent to their deaths. And I remember getting a chill down my spine and thinking, wow, what a story that would be. And so I started writing that first chapter with Alex and Aaron, and them standing in the line with the other unwanteds, the other children, and being put into their categories. And then I got to the point where I knew something had to happen for these children so that they didn't all die, because if they did, it'd be a really short book. So I thought I really wanted to bring something that was a little more magical, a little more light into the story, because it was so dark. And I remembered the stories that I loved to read when I was a kid, like the Chronicles of Narnia. And I remembered how much I loved that magical world. So I started working on a magical world, and that's sort of how it went. That's how the whole beginning of things happened. And so now we're on the 13th book in this world out of 14. There will be one more book after this. It comes out February 2nd, and that's going to be the end. I'm almost 100% sure. But I wanted to read a little passage of Dragon Slayers to you. So I hope you don't mind that I'm going to read a little piece from it. If you don't want to hear it, you can mute, or you can turn off your sound for about a couple of minutes, and I'll fold the book back up when I'm finished, and then you'll know that I'm done reading. But I'm going to set up this passage. So at the end of book 5, Dragon Curse, we see Dev. He's been hiding in that palace, in Ashgard's palace, and he sees the Revenir and a group of dragons coming toward him, and he makes a run for it to that village that has been completely vacated. It's that empty village that has no people. And he goes there to hide overnight. So he escapes, and when he comes back out, he stands at the edge of the property, and he sees these 4 red dragons guarding the property, and he can also see a light coming from the window up in his library that he's sort of taken on as his own. And he's both curious and furious about it, because he sort of, feels like he has some ownership of this place, and he doesn't know who it is. So that's to set it up a little bit. And now I'm going to read starting on page 47. It's called Testing the Dragons. Dev had spent a restless night in the village, lying on a cold floor and trying to sleep, trying to justify the fact that he was hiding from the dragons when maybe he should be defending his palace, or meeting his grandfather, or sleeping on his sofa. In Grimir, he'd reasoned, people walked around without the dragons bothering them, but this seemed different. The last time the Revenir had roared, it had been a command to kill him. Did that command expire after Drak had caught him mid-fall and taken him away? Or would these dragons still have that goal in mind if they discovered it was him? It's not like the dragons had seemed to care that he had been standing at the edge of the property earlier, but what if he took the lengthy trek from the orchard through the brush and up the hill and went halfway across the open courtyard to the center tower? That was the part that frightened him the most. If the dragons decided that they were interested in him after all, if they came for him once he stepped onto the property, he had no place to hide. They'd catch him for sure. Whether he made a run for the tower or back to the village, he wouldn't be able to beat them. He'd thought about food. Could he catch some fish and use it to bribe them? Or perhaps the dragons went to the river to drink and eat at some point. That was it. He'd get close enough to spy and wait for them to go to the river. And that's exactly where he'd been sitting for hours in the early morning fog, waiting for at least one of the dragons to go to the river so his chances of being eaten were lessened. Not long ago, all four had moved toward the tower, but then they'd retreated. Dev had held his ground and continued to wait. Then he saw movement way up in his library window. The person, whoever it was still up there. He sat up as the person looked out. He couldn't make out any features. The angle was too sharp and the sun was bouncing off the dusty glass, obscuring his view with a glare. He didn't feel afraid to be seen. Humans weren't his enemies these days. Maybe Ashgard or whoever it was could help if he wasn't hiding from the dragons. Keeping his eye on the great red beasts, Dev stood up and took a few slow steps forward through the brush, trying not to make any sudden movements that might set the dragons in motion. They looked at him, but didn't move. Dev kept walking. His heart began to pound and his scales rose on his arms and legs, snagging his new wool skirt. "Everybody just stay where you are," he muttered under his breath. "Nothing is happening here." He kept his head down, watching from the corner of his eye, first one dragon, then the other. The front dragon made a noise and shook out its wings. It took a step toward him. Dev kept walking, picking up his pace slightly, acutely aware of where he was in relationship to safety at every moment. He reached the halfway point. If the dragon charged now, Dev was better off running for the tower than the orchard and village. He began the climb up the hill, and two more red dragons at the far corners of the property came into view. Great. They turned toward him, and one rose up to get a better view, then rumbled and spat a spray of fire. Dev pretended he was a townsperson in Dragon's March, going about his business, and didn't slow down. He reached the edge of the courtyard and headed between two of the small towers, aiming for the larger one in the center of the property. His tower. Who would he find inside? At this point, he didn't care. If it was anyone other than the gray man, he'd make them leave. None of the dragons took more than a few steps toward him. With his heartbeat pounding in his ears, Dev sprinted the last few steps to the middle tower doorway and darted inside. The foxes startled but then settled when they saw him. He said a few soothing words to comfort them and himself, and then he started up the stairwell as fast as he could climb. Halfway up, he heard a noise and whirled around. Had the dragons come after him? He peered anxiously out of the windows and saw they were still in their corners. With a sigh of relief, he turned, and there, on the curve of the stairwell, several steps above him, was a shocking sight. "You're alive," said Pfeiffer softly. Dev sucked in a breath and stared at her. "Yes," he whispered, and then, overcome by the sight of an ally, he gripped the handrail and doubled over, feeling pain and hope and fear crash together inside him. "Oh, gods," he whispered, "it's you." He suppressed a sob and covered his eyes, then looked again to make sure it was really Pfeiffer and that she was really wearing the head mage robe of Arteme. "You came." Pfeiffer nodded, her expression cracking with emotion at the sight of his tears. She went down one more step uncertainly, then another. "Do you want help?" Dev nodded, overcome. He climbed the step to her and slipped his arms around Pfeiffer's waist in a hug. "Oh," said Pfeiffer, stiffening in surprise. After a moment, she reached around him too. Then she gently pressed his head against her shoulder, feeling his sobs. His warm tears soaked into her robe. She wasn't quite sure what was happening to make him react like this, but whatever experiences he'd been through since she'd seen him last had obviously changed him. She reckoned she'd changed a bit since then, too. So, All done.
Yay, Lisa.
So there we go.
So Lisa, I had a question for you before we start taking questions. You had mentioned before you started to jump into your overview of the book and everything that you thought that there was one more in this series left. When you say you think, is it because you feel like you might have one more in you, or that the story isn't going to be completed after the next one, or is there a different reason?
The story is definitely complete after the next book. I've already written it. We're in the editing process right now, so it will be complete, but I never say never, and I just never know. There may be some time where I just want to revisit it and write another part of it, but at this moment, I don't think so. I think this is going to be the end.
Yeah. Are you looking forward to moving on to something different, a whole different story?
Yes, I do have a couple of things in the works. I've got, and I can't really talk about them yet, so just stay tuned to my social media. Once I have a chance to reveal them, I think you're going to be really excited. I've got a standalone coming up next fall, a year from now, and then I'm going to be starting a new series that's a little bit different, but I think you're going to love it. It's very exciting. I'm working on both of those things right now, so that's really going to be fun. But keep in touch with me on my social media, and if you don't know how to find me there, I'm at Lisa_McMann on Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. There's also the UNWANTEDS app, which is fantastic. I don't really have much to do with that other than making an appearance every now and then. But the UNWANTEDS app is such a cool place for people who love the Unwanted series to talk to each other. There's also a place where you can upload your creative writing and fan fiction and art. And there are chat rooms there. So it's just a lot of fun for the fans. And you can find that, just type in UNWANTEDS, the UNWANTEDS on all your different phone.
App Store, Google Play, all that good stuff.
I don't know what I'm talking about. See,
That's all right.
Aren't you glad I didn't make the app? Because I don't have a clue.
So Matt, are you able, I assume you're able to see the questions, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Heidi, I am good to go.
You're good to go. All right, so we're going to toss it over to Matt.
Awesome.
Got it.
Matt is my husband. Sometimes I call him Mr. Lisa, but he has his own name, and it is Matt.
But I prefer Mr. Lisa.
How do you?
Proud to be so. So Lisa, we have a ton of questions from these awesome fans. And one that got a lot of upvotes is about the black eyes of some of the characters. The first question is, where did Justine's black eyes come from?
I am not going to answer that. I think I know who asked that, because you already asked me that.
That was from Abby. All right, Abby, sorry, I gave it a shot for you.
Good try, good try.
Okay, well, maybe this one. This one's from Michael Buckwald. Is it possible for Aaron and Kaylee in the future to have black-eyed children?
That's a good question. Probably. I mean, I haven't done the study of the genes of whether black eyes is dominant or not in this world, but it could possibly happen.
All right. Okay, we're getting quite a bit of love for Clemente and Asha's relationship. Mm-hmm. So Tech wants to know if we're going to see more of Clemente and Asha's relationship. And Aaron Stowe wants to see a few more scenes between Asha and Clementi because the relationship is so cute. And finally, Dory wants to know very specifically, will we see a Clamasha kiss?
I can't remember if you're gonna see a Clamasha kiss, but I love that. That's really funny. I love that little relationship there too, and yes. Gosh, I'm getting all embarrassed about it. It's so cute. I think that they are a very cute couple as well. How about that?
That's lovely.
Clamasha. I love it.
Okay, this one's kind of fun from Kale. Just for fun, which twin do you like better, Thisbe or Pfeiffer?
Well, of course, I love them both the same.
Wow.
I love them in different ways. That's a really tough question, actually. It depends which book, I think. Like for Dragon Slayers, I kind of love them the same in the new book, but I've gone back and forth between which one I prefer, depending on which book we're in.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. Tech would like to know if we're going to see more of Thatcher and Henry's relationship.
I love Thatcher and Henry so much. You'll see glimpses of them. They're not major characters in this series, unfortunately, but they do exist in the series, and so you'll see a little bit of them. But yeah, it's so hard. Here's the thing. I wish I could show you all of the relationships, like a lot, but there's so many characters in the series. There's well over 100. And so I have to kind of pick and choose whose stories I'm telling. And I tend to stick to the children in the series rather than the adults. So that's why we don't see as much of the Henry and Thatcher as maybe you'd like, but I would love for you to just imagine them having all kinds of romantic times.
So Kale is wondering, will we ever learn more about Nadia?
I can't remember how. Okay, so as you know, I've finished Dragon Slayers and I've already finished the last book. You might learn a little bit more about Nadia, but not a whole lot.
Let's see. All right, there's a lot of interest around future Unwanted's books. So you talked earlier about never saying never, but a number of fans are asking about a prequel that would probably focus on Marcus, Justine, and Igala. Would you ever consider doing a prequel?
I don't think I would do a prequel, to be honest. You'll get more of that history in this book and in the next book. And I don't feel a lot of motivation to write a prequel series or anything like that because we've already heard so much about what happens to them and how they have, come to be. So and I don't think their story is that interesting, really. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm just wrong.
I do. I think it's interesting.
I don't feel it in my heart that I would want to write a prequel or a prequel series. So I'm going to say 14 books is the right amount, and I think that's it.
Fair enough. We can't ask for more than 14, I suppose. All right, Sapphire Dragon wonders, did you know about the Unwanted's quest before you finished the first series or after Island of Dragons was done?
Okay, so that's a great question. I love that question. I was thinking already that there might be a sequel series starting around book 3 of the first series. And that's why I started the story of Thisbe and Pfeiffer and their mom being pregnant. And I think book 3, it's mentioned first. That I did on purpose because I thought I might want to do another series and I'll need some new main characters for that series. So by the time I finished book 5, I think I'd already been in talks with my editor about doing a sequel series. And I was starting to get ideas about what would happen there. And yeah, so I did know, and I wasn't sure there was going to be one, but I was putting things into the first series that I could use for a sequel series just in case.
Great. This one is an interesting one. It's not really quite a question, but I wanted to bring it up because it's gotten the most upvotes of any question or comment. And it's interest about Rohan and Thisbe's relationship to Maven. And it was brought up by Kale, and it goes like this. I've been meaning to know, Rohan and Thisbe are kind of related since Maven is now Rohan's adoptive grandma while she's still Thisbe's grandmother. Did that ever throw a wrench in your romantic plans between the two of them?
Okay, I've seen this question floating around Instagram. I'm just going to tell you right now. I think I've made it pretty clear that that Rohan is not biologically related to Maven. Just think of this. You're Rohan. You're in this world. You have none of your family left. And the queen of your people, Maven, who's a grandmother to Thisbe and Pfeiffer, is being kind to you. And she lets you call her grandma just because she's being kind. And she figures he probably needs to feel like he has some family. But that doesn't make them really related. Now, come on. Rohan is from the other line. Thisbe and Pfeiffer are from Maven, the Tavir line. Rohan is from the Suresh line. That's it. They're not related.
Fair enough. I think that's a great
kids,
answer.
Come on.
I like this question because I love the grandfathers so much. Chloe asks, will we ever know how Kaylee and the grandfathers got to the 7 Islands?
I feel like we do know that.
We do, but I think it would be good to clarify.
So in the first series, if you haven't read the first series, you'll find out by reading that. You learn about the grandfathers and Kaylee in books 5 and 6 and 7. But they came through the Dragon's Triangle, which is kind of like the Bermuda Triangle where ships get lost all the time. But it's over near Japan. And so, yeah, they were lost at sea, basically. And it's fun because the scientists, Ishibashi and Ito and Sato, they've been there for years, obviously. But I took their story from a true thing that really happened. There was a ship that went down in the Dragon's Triangle, and it was never found again. And if you remember in book 5, I think, or 6, they go down and find that ship that's been shipwrecked. And it's the Caillou Maro number 5, or I think that's how it is. I can't remember now. But that was a real ship that got lost in the Dragon's Triangle. And then there was another ship full of scientists who were looking for that ship that went down, and they went down too. So that was taken from an actual historical thing that really happened in the 1950s. So fun fact.
Very fun. This question has gotten a lot of interest as well, and it's about non-binary characters. And in specific, the question was wondering, is it possible that Dev could be non-binary?
Sure, anything's possible.
Cool. Another question that I thought was pretty fun was, does Marcus potentially have a crown hidden somewhere in the Museum of Large?
Sure, anything could happen.
That's fair. And that's
funny.
great. I love this question. What was the hardest scene to write in the most recent book?
Oh, wow. Toward the end, there's a very hard scene toward the end of Dragon Slayers. Very tough. Yes.
Ellie was wondering, which twin, Thisbe or Pfeiffer, do you relate to the most?
That's a good question. Probably Pfeiffer, quite honestly. Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more like her, but I relate to both of them in different ways. It just depends on the situation. They're both growing so much throughout the series, and they grow at different speeds, really. Thisbe's sort of forced into growing up because of the situation she finds herself in, and Pfeiffer lags behind a little bit, but then is sort of forced into growing up a little bit more as well, until they're really coming to the point in this book where they are both sort of on the same page. And I think that's kind of cool too.
For sure. Kaylee was wondering, were there any moments that you cried as you wrote the series?
Yes, I have cried many times writing the series. Some of you know there's some deaths in the series, in both the first series and the new one. And for every halfway decent person who dies, I really put a lot of thought into that. And I don't just kill people randomly because I think it's fun. I actually really think about it a lot, and it hurts. But I'm always putting the story first. What is right for the story and what's best for the story. And I know that it's going to be... Oh, Emerald, I see your little Liam Healy there. That's funny. Yes, I know you have a heart for him. But anyway, it means something big to me to kill off a character. And I don't do it lightly, but I do it because I feel like it's important to the story. But I cry every time. In fact, a couple of times I've almost felt like going back and deleting the whole part of the story where they die so that it doesn't happen. But I've never actually done that. Everyone I've felt like needs to go, I've made the decision before I actually write the little part. So there we go.
I have to read this question just because it makes me laugh. And it's by Michael Buchwald. And he says, what do you think about my ridiculous theory about how this will all end? Thisbe and Pfeiffer capture the Hibagon and force the Reveneer to watch him, and then she will fall in love with him. Then the Hibagon convinces her to fly them to our world, and hopefully she loses her magic in the process.
I say anything can happen. That's my standard answer to everything from now on.
I'm a fan of anything involving Hibagon, Michael, so well done.
I do love the Hibagon.
Well done with that one.
I can't wait for you guys to read book 7, quite honestly. I'm so excited about it.
Awesome. How about any advice for aspiring writers? Sapphire Dragon just finished their first book. Yay.
Congratulations.
And is hoping to get published someday. So any advice for aspiring writers?
Yes. So I one thing I think that aspiring writers should do as sort of just a practice thing is to take the book that you love to read. Now, when I was a kid, I had certain books that I would read over and over again, and I still do. And I'm sure some of you have books that you love so much, you read it over and over again. Even though you know exactly what's going to happen, you still really look forward to certain passages in the books. And so I want you to pick the book that you love to read and read it again like a writer. And I want you to look for those passages that you're really looking forward to and ask yourself some questions about, like, why do I really love this passage so much? What is it about this passage that makes me love it, even though I know exactly what's going to happen? And then I want you to take your own characters and write a similar scene to that, because you're going to be a great writer if you're writing about things you love, the kinds of storylines you love. So whether it's a relationship story, or maybe there's a lot of danger, or maybe it's a paranormal event that's happening or something, figure that out. What do you love? And then take your own characters and sort of imitate those scenes that you love from other writers. How about that?
That is pretty great advice.
Okay.
Okay, how about, what is your favorite book that you've written in the series so far?
You know, in the first series, probably the book that was my favorite to write was Island of Graves, because of what happens with Aaron. In this series, I think it's Dragon Slayers, or it's the last, oh man, I think it's the last book. This one's very close though. I loved writing this book. I think it's probably the best one in all, out of all 13 so far. And it's similar because of something that happens with Bisbee, and she really puts herself in a position where everybody she loves could end up hating her. So that was really tough, but it was very satisfying to write, and I really enjoyed it.
Downfall 39 has a fun question. What inspired the creation of the Blackboards and their personalities?
Okay, that brings me back 10 years or 12 years. So the Blackboards, I think I needed a method of communication so that people could get announcements or get information without needing a cell phone or a computer. And Clive was the first Blackboard. No, I don't think that's the first one I wrote. I think it was Megan's Blackboard that I wrote first. But so the Blackboard itself, it's like a face kind of presses out, right? And I got that idea from, I don't know if you're going to be able to know what I'm talking about, but my sister used to work at a store called Natural Wonders, and they had this thing where with this little like box or square thing that had all little pins sticking up, little metal pins that moved, and you could push your hand down in them and your handprint would be there, right? So that's how I pictured the Blackboard personalities sort of waking up and coming to light. It was like their face pressed out of this Blackboard. So that's kind of what I was thinking as far as what they look like. And I figured the Blackboards would be magical, and so they'd have personalities as well. So, but Clive was just a joy to write. He was so much fun.
Kind of related, there was a question about the scroll effect in the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you envision the scroll effect working, both for the entire islands, the chain of 7 islands, and for how it worked in Artemis with the jungle?
So the scroll feature was just a magical spell that Mr. Today came up with to keep. Basically, he's bringing all these unwanteds into his world, and he's got this jungle, and he's got all these statues out there in the jungle that some of them aren't very safe. And he's figuring that after all of these unwanteds have been living in Quill under like very strict rules, that once they get to Arteme and they're given all this freedom to just go and do whatever they want, that he needed to keep them safe. And so basically, if you walk too far toward the jungle, he's got a magic spell that's going to kind of flip you back over to the other side of the safe part of the world. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think it was just more kind of curious about how the scroll effect works and stuff, because it's just such an unusual feature.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question, which I think is so powerful. How did you feel putting the last period on the last sentence on the first draft of the final book?
Oh, boy. You know, it's interesting. The last chapter, I actually wrote the last chapter before I finished the whole book, because I knew how everything was going to end. I've known for years how everything was going to end. And so I think I started writing the 7th book in the Quest series, and I got about a third of the way in, and then I just couldn't wait any longer. I just wanted to write the last chapter. So this is kind of a tough question, but it felt amazing to write it. It was something that's been on my mind for a really long time, and I couldn't wait to actually get it written down. So it felt amazing, really, but bittersweet too. But because I wrote the last chapter before I really finished the whole book, it didn't feel quite so bittersweet until I went through and edited it and then got to the end, and then it was like, okay, wow, that's over. So
yeah, that's
Kinda
cool. I
cool.
can only imagine what that must have felt like. Well, I feel like we're kind of getting to the end here, and so Heidi and Ross, I think I'm going to toss it back your way for you guys to close however you choose.
Perfect.
All right. There you are. You can scoot in here.
Hi, everybody.
This is my cohort at the bookstore, who happens to be my husband as well. So it's a family affair here. So Ross, did you have any questions for Lisa or comments?
I will ask Lisa the same question I asked her before that she didn't have a good answer for. Will there ever be a graphic novel version of Unwanteds?
I don't think so. Not at this time. I think that would be really cool, but I don't know how to write it. And I'm not sure if there's enough demand out there for a graphic novel for this series, but I mean, gravel novel, yes. That was funny. I love this little the running.
So that should tell everybody in the chat that if you'd like to see a graphic novel, you should start mentioning that to Lisa and to her various publishers.
You got it. That's how it works. No, I think it would be really cool. I'd love to do that sometime. I don't have any plans for that at this time because I don't know that the demand is there for it from the fans. So, great.
Fair enough.
So just to let anybody know that ordered from the store, we have gotten all of the orders out that have gotten into the store before 3 o'clock today. Everything is shipped so far. We still have posters left. We still have books left. So feel free to order, and we'll get them out tomorrow.
And if I doubt this is the case here tonight, but if you're relatively new to the series, we have all of the books in the series and more.
And I signed a bunch of
from
those
Lisa, so
as
we
well.
can
I
take
signed a
care
bunch
you
of
in
those
that.
as well. So if you're looking for a gift, you've got just
Yes.
about all of the books in with signatures on them now.
Yeah. Yep. So
That's
If
right.
not, we know where you live.
Well, Lisa and Matt, thank you for joining us tonight. It's our honor to always host your events, and look forward to being able to hang out with you guys again once
I know.
COVID is over.
I know. One day.
I think we promised you a trip to wine country if it still exists after all the fire.
We're gonna need it.
Yes, we will.
Apparently, I don't know if you're looking at the comments on the right, Lisa. Everybody
I know.
wants a graphic novel.
Well,
So you can thank Ross for that,
Thanks,
Cameron.
You're welcome. Always happy to make your life a little bit more interesting.
I love hearing from my fans, and I love to know what they want. So this was perfect that you asked the question. Thank you.
Oh, very good. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you when the last book comes
Very
out.
good.
in
And I will see
February.
you all on the internet, and hopefully we will have some more news for you soon on what's coming next. So don't forget to follow me.
Great.
And Capital Books.
All right.
Bye,
All right.
everyone.
Bye. I
Lisa
love
and Matt.
you.